So a fireball lighting up the Beirut sky. That's how the Daily Mail is describing things. They're talking about the latest round of Israeli airstrikes. And it paints a pretty intense picture of what's happening there right now.
Yeah, no, it really highlights, I think, how tense things are in the region, especially, with the anniversary of that attack last year, the one on October 7th, just a few days away.
Right, that anniversary, yeah, it feels really significant here. But okay, before we get into that, maybe we should, unpack what's happening with these airstrikes a bit. Some of the reports, like this one from ABS-CBN News, they're calling them very violent, and they're saying there have been more than 30 strikes. And that's just in Beirut, hitting a Hezbollah stronghold there.
And, to really get why this is such a big deal, it's really important to understand Hezbollah. I mean, they're a major player in Lebanon, both in their politics and militarily. And they've got these close ties to Iran, you see. So it gets complicated because these airstrikes, they aren't just about Israel and Lebanon, right? It's pulling these other big players in, too.
Yeah, it's almost like, I don't know, like the whole geopolitical landscape is like shifting right under our feet. And then you read the Daily Mail piece and it really hits you. The human cost of this conflict, they've got this account from an eyewitness. This person had to flee their home while bombs were dropping. It's really harrowing.
Yeah, it really is. And it just makes the timing of these airstrikes, happening so close to October 7th, it makes it all the more, significant, I guess.
Okay, so let's talk about that anniversary. For those who, for anyone who might not be totally familiar with it, what exactly happened on October 7th last year? What's got everyone on edge right now?
So last year on October 7th, there was this large-scale attack on Israel, and it was Palestinian militants, a lot of them connected to Hamas, who carried it out.
Okay.
And it was a complex operation, really. I mean, there were infiltrations, kidnappings, rocket fire, you name it. Over 1,200 people in Israel were killed.
Wow.
Yeah, and a lot of them were civilians.
Yeah, it was a day that really shook the whole region, So I can see why this anniversary coming up is making a lot of people nervous, right?
Oh, absolutely. And Israeli officials haven't exactly been quiet about it either. They're worried about the potential for more attacks, retaliatory attacks. They've actually, they've really ramped up their security because of it.
Yeah. And that's what makes quotes like the one from Prime Minister Netanyahu, the one in that Daily Mail piece.
Mm-hmm.
It just makes you think, when he calls this whole thing a fight against barbarism,
right? It
kind of makes you wonder about the message it sends, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Not just within Israel, but globally too.
Yeah, I think it's the kind of language that, it's worth paying attention to. I mean, it shows just how serious things are, at least from Israel's point of view. But it also, I don't know, I think it highlights just how deep the emotions run in this whole conflict and how complicated it all is, And the thing is, we have to remember this isn't, it's not just about Beirut. It's not even just about this anniversary. Israel, I mean, they've also been fighting this war with Hamas in Gaza, and that all started really as a response to the attack on October 7th.
Right. And the ABS-CBN News article, it mentions that over 41,825 people, casualties, have been reported in Gaza just since that conflict began. And over 1,100 people have been killed in Lebanon. And I mean, those numbers, it's just heartbreaking. It's easy to get lost in the numbers. But I mean, like we've been talking about, there are real people, real lives caught in the middle of this.
Absolutely. And the UN, they've been pretty vocal about it. They're really worried about all the Lebanese citizens who've been displaced, forced to flee their homes because of this. And I think that's something that sometimes it gets lost, It's easy to focus on the violence itself, but it's important to remember what happens after,
Yeah.
The long-term effects, some people who've had to leave everything behind.
So with everything going on, I mean, what's the global response been like?
Well, it's been mixed. Some world leaders are, they're calling for everyone to calm down, basically, to try and find a peaceful way out of this.
Right.
Like France's President Macron, he was pretty critical of Israel's response, and he's urging other countries to stop sending arms to Gaza.
Wow. It really does seem like the whole world is just like on edge, hoping for a ceasefire. Is anyone trying to make that happen?
Yeah, actually, there are international mediators who've been, working behind the scenes trying to get a ceasefire in both Gaza and Lebanon. But, as you can probably imagine, it's been slow going. And it's really fragile, the progress they've made.
Yeah, I did. What, I don't know, what would you say is the biggest thing holding things back?
I think, honestly, it's the hostages.
The hostage.
Hamas, they took a number of hostages during that initial attack on October 7th. And trying to negotiate their release, it's been incredibly difficult.
Yes, the hostages are a major sticking point, huh? Yeah, it sounds like, well, like figuring out how to move forward it's just incredibly complicated.
Yeah, no, it really is. It's definitely tense. There's no doubt about that. But, I think it's important to keep in mind that diplomacy, well, it takes time. Especially when you're talking about a conflict that's this deep and this I don't know, ingrained, and the fact that these international mediators, they're still engaged. That's got to count for something, right? Even if it feels like things are moving really slowly.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I get that. And it feels like this whole thing, this whole conflict, I mean, it's about so much more than just what's happened in the past year,
Oh, for sure. I mean, yeah, the anniversary of that attack, the October 7th attack, it's definitely a flashpoint, right? It brings everything to the surface. But the reality is this conflict, it goes back decades. I mean,
Right.
you've got, generations of grievances and this deep mistrust and just a lot of violence on both sides. And finding a way out of that, a way that actually lasts, that's going to mean, it's going to mean dealing with those root issues.
Okay, so where do we go from here? I mean, what are we supposed to take away from all of this?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? We've talked about what's happening right now, about this anniversary, about the just devastating human cost of this whole thing. But I think the question we all have to ask ourselves now is, well, what's it going to take to actually stop this? To break the cycle?
Yeah.
What happens to this region, to the world, if we can't find a way out? And what about the rest of the world? What role can they play in pushing for, I don't know, for something better, a more peaceful future? I mean, these are tough questions, but they're the ones we've got to be asking ourselves as we watch this whole thing unfold.